All right, so welcome and thank you for joining this powerful webinar as we talk and tackle the topic of racism and police brutality. My name is Raquel Wilson. I am the Youth Voice Manager here at Foster Media Connections and will also be your moderator for today. The purpose of this webinar is to provide current and former foster youth a safe space, open space to speak about their experiences with racism and police just in general and police brutality. As a former foster youth myself, I can testify that we deal with police throughout many phases of our life. And while we're matriculating through the system, we come in contact with police a lot of times, and often it's unspoken of. And so the police are present when we are removed from the care of our parents. Every time we switch placements, often the police are our escorts. Every time there is a 7-day notice issued, a youth AWOLs, the police is present as well. And so we pretty much interact with the police as we navigate to find our way through the system. And with every opportunity and every encounter comes a personal experience someone can share. We wanted to provide youth the opportunity to share these experiences in hopes to educate and provide a learning space and for others who may be unaware. So thank you for choosing to be here with us today. We are very grateful to have you and we're just thankful. So this webinar was brought to you by Foster Media Connections. Foster Media Connections uses the power of media and journalism to drive a conversation about children, youth, families in America. We have two really prominent spaces that we utilize to as our platform to contribute stories and provide stories. One is Foster Media Today, Foster Families Today, which is for foster parents and adoptee parents to give them tips and provide them, different skills and stories from other foster youth, to help develop them. And so hopefully that they become better as they challenge and go through the days phases of being a parent in that environment. And then we have the Chronicle of Social Change, with the Youth Voice program falls under. And that's where we post most of the stories that are centered around foster youth and juvenile justice. In addition, we have the Youth Voice program, which our main objective is to get the voices of both current and former foster youth heard through different projects like this webinar training. Just to highlight a little about the Youth Voice program. The Youth Voice program began in 2016 as a journalism training program. We support young people with live experiences in the foster care and juvenile justice system. And recently we have placed a huge emphasis on getting perspectives from youth who are in higher education. Before I give our lovely panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves, I wanted to briefly go over some of the agenda and our official house rules. And so we have already done the welcome and spoke about Foster Media Connections and what the Youth Voice program is. We are going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to start our open conversation with the panelists. And then we're going to open the floor for any current or former foster youth who would like to share their experiences. And we're going to open the floor when we wrap up for anyone who would like to share. Everyone will have the opportunity to ask questions. To be fair to everyone, we ask that each person utilize 2 minutes to speak. I will let you know when you are 30 seconds out. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hands feature to be unmuted to speak, and we'll answer questions in the chat first. So if you have a question and you would like to just post it in the chat, please do so as well. I wanted to go over some house rules with you guys as well. And so one of the house rules, we ask that everyone be respectful and use active listening. Know that this presentation is being recorded just so that we can evaluate it basically. And then we will save all the questions for the end. As stated before, you may post them in the chat directly if you do not wish to speak openly. And so, yes, now we will have our panelists introduce themselves, then we'll segue right into our open discussion. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Tatiana. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm currently a full-time college student. Um, I'm going to school for psychology and drug counseling, so I'm trying to do a double major there. But yeah, I was in placement from around age 15 until I graduated high school, jumping from placement to placement. So yeah, I'm glad, I'm welcome. I'm happy to be here, and that's about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Hey everybody, I'm Aaliyah Zian. I currently reside in Louisiana. I'm 24 years old and I was in the foster care system for 5 years from age 13 to 18 until I also graduated high school. I'm currently a child welfare social worker in my state and I'm starting grad school in August for my master's in social work. Thank you guys. I'm really happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Tasha. I'm from San Diego, California. Grew up here my whole life. I've been in foster care basically since I was a baby, from the time I was like a couple months old until I was 21. And graduated from UCSD and have been working in the foster care like related fields from the foster family agency with social workers, as well as like a law firm, Children's Legal Services of San Diego. And so just working in both those spaces and being an advocate in those spaces and in other spaces as well. And I'm excited to see for the first time, what feels like the first time, like in a way, being able to dialogue about the intersection of being a foster youth and a black child slash woman in the foster care system and how it connects to racial injustices. So thanks for having me and thanks for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Ivory Bennett. I'm 29 years old. I spent 17 years in the foster care system from the ages of 4 to 21 when I aged out. I was in about 12 different homes, about 15 different schools. I currently am a graduate student at Concordia University. I am working to become a principal with a master's in education administration. I'm an English teacher and a cheer coach, and I love to advocate and foster youth, especially in educational advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for being here with us today. Thank you guys for being open to share your experience with us. I am very grateful to have you guys here. And I'm sure that everyone is interested to hear what you guys have to say and to jump into the dialogue. So as stated before, foster youth unknowingly have experiences with police during early stages of our lives. What has your experience been with police brutality or police in general while in foster care or thereafter? In addition, please share if you have had challenges and while you have dealt with racism while in foster care.
Okay, so hello everyone again. So I never really experienced any, I felt like prejudiced toward police officers in those interactions, but I did have a lot of triggering encounters with the police, so I just kind of wanted to elaborate on that. So one of the biggest things I noticed is like once you're in the system and whenever your name is run, I feel like there's kind of just that bias toward you that like, oh, you're in the system. There's a reason why you're in the system and you're going to be treated A, B, and C because of that. So yeah, I have really bad anxiety and PTSD. So a lot of times when I would have encounters with the police, which would happen frequently, there was just very little training on how to handle those situations when someone's in a panic attack or when someone's PTSD is triggered. And it just kind of exacerbated a lot of those symptoms and issues in my life. And yeah, so I was sexually assaulted at the age of 14. And there was a lot of speculation at my school, and law enforcement ended up being pulled into that. And it was just a very emotional moment for me. So I was taken home from school, and the police officer did not communicate with me that he would have to tell my mom what had happened to me. So it was just a very unexpected thing to be told by the police officer to my mom what had happened, especially because I was 14. I think that, you know, it was just a very tough time. And for him to tell my mom instead of me, just kind of ripped that freedom away from me. So yeah, that's about all I have.
Thank you, Tatiana, for sharing that It took my breath away. Thank you so much for being open to sharing your experiences with us. As the other panelists ask the questions, you guys can just feel free to express yourself or answer the question. So we'll have Aaliyah go next.
Hey everybody. My first experiences that come to mind when thinking about police is when I was 13 years old. My mom always struggled with mental health when we were growing up. And one night in the kitchen, she slipped and fell. But instead of just saying what actually happened, she accused me of assaulting her and hitting on her and said that's why she fell. So she called the police out to our house, and she claimed that she was afraid of me, even though at that age I was maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Both the police officers were white males, and when they came into the house, they handled me like in a derogatory tone, like in my own house. And one of the police officers turned to my mom and was saying, I would beat the hell out of her next time if she does something like that, or if she acts up again, teach her a lesson. And so the whole time, like, my mom was actually abusing me. And so that was like the last message that they should have been sending. My mom is white, and they turned to her and kind of said, like, you know how they get, like, referring to me, and they pitied her, I guess, because of her white skin tone and the area that we lived in, and also an absent Black husband who she blamed for everything, also. And then, so they put me in the back of a police car, completely handcuffed at 13 with sirens and everything. And that's how, like, I left my house that night. I slept on the floor of the police station until I got signed out, and I was charged with a false simple battery charge. If those officers would have took the time to analyze what was really going on, or even called in a CPS report just from the nature of what happened, they would have saved me a lot of pain. I've seen this happen a lot of times where police officers are the first on the scene and they don't have the necessary skills to be able to analyze and see what's going on in abusive situations. And so kids end up staying there longer than they should. And I feel like during that time, they let me down, just like a lot of other adults in my life that saw things and did nothing. Shortly after that, a full investigation did happen because someone else called in a report. And at that time, my mom had me locked in my room for about 2 weeks. So I was pretty much peeing in a bucket. And if they had intervened before then, things would probably not have escalated as far. And I just feel like they used their power in the way that it shouldn't have been used. While I was in care, I was always placed with African-American families. That's what I, felt, that's what I mostly identified with. Like, I mostly identified with my Black side because anywhere I went when it was an African-American family fully, like, they accepted me, they treated me like a person, just welcomed me with open arms. And so there was just a fear of police, like, even in those communities, like, scared to get pulled over, even when they weren't doing anything wrong, just the overall distaste and fear of, like, police. Even if something did happen, they would just handle it themselves. And also, when I was in care, I had a foster parent that had a heart condition, and I got really attached to her. I spent 2 years there, and one night she began to struggle to breathe. And so, her husband called the police and everything, and it took the police and the ambulance literally 30 minutes to get to that area to address a woman dying from a heart condition. So she died in front of me when I was 15. And my last situation is that when I did first initially enter care, they deemed me that I was in a traumatic mental state. I needed to be PEC'd. And so I was transported all the way to the mental hospital, which was 4 hours away, in the back of a police car, like I had done something wrong, with my hands behind my back, zip tied, couldn't move. And I felt like a criminal. I'm not the criminal. Those police officers that are shooting unarmed Black men, and yet many minority youth in the system feel criminalized and marginalized before they even hit the world at 18. And that's my piece on that.
Thank you, Aaliyah, so much for having the courage and just a great spirit to be able to share that beautiful story. Very powerful. I'm sure that while there are people on the call who have, had different circumstances, your experience was very, very much so layered, and just, you know, I appreciate you so much for providing us some great detail into some of the things that you have experienced, and just, you know, being able to be emotionally open to share that with us today. So thank you. Thank you so much. So, okay, Tasha, we'll have you answer the same question.
Yeah, I mean, starting off with some of the labels that I had growing up, specific to special needs. I won't go into detail, but that was a label that, you know, was labeled on me for most of my life, and my foster parents, who were Black, like kind of reedifying that for a check, that they could get a special care rate. But as I graduated, I got into certain schools like UC Berkeley and UCSD and different stuff, and I ended up going to UC Berkeley first, and I went there for a couple of weeks. And that's when all of this like stuff, like, oh, like you know, I'm sorry if these words are triggering, so trigger warning, but oh, she's retarded. You know, I'm taking all of this stuff with me. Oh, she's retarded. She's not gonna be able to dress herself. You know, she's this, that. She's gonna be blind by the time she's 30. All of this stuff, all these labels I'm taking with me to Berkeley, but feeling super like, you know, all the you know, trauma of that home coming full force into my life, to where I didn't make it through the summer session into the 4 years of Berkeley. And I don't know, I just, like, the trauma surfaced to the point where the police came, handcuffed me. It's kind of one of those fight or flight moments in my mind, but I'm going through this severe traumatic state, and like not really being listened to. But by that point, I come back to San Diego. The label of schizophrenia was posted on me up there, and I came down with that, even though I felt like I didn't have a say in what was going on in my life other than people being a voice for me. And so again, same old story, like hospitalized multiple times up until transferring to UCSD. And again, the labels, hospitalizations, me not doing the speaking, but everyone else doing it. Until a couple years later, a year after being at UCSD and living on campus, I find out my foster parents committed fraud. They were using me, committed fraud, and that's when all the trauma resurfaced, because I knew that my connection with them wasn't going to be the same. And again, I entrusted connection with a specific psychologist at UCSD, who, you know, everything I did was a psychosis. Me doing this with my hair, that's a part of your psychosis. Me, just anything I did or said was a part of my psychosis. So he calls the police, and I know he's doing that in his space, a white male psychologist. And I know it's happening. So again, fight or flight. I'm trying to make it out of there, but I'm also torn because I don't want to get shot or anything. And so I'm kind of torn on what to do because I don't want to be chased down. And so from there, the police come, and huge trauma, handcuffed. You know, psychologist is holding my backpack and my jacket saying like, yeah, you know, I have your stuff, and just super twisted stuff in that moment. And it's just, I mean, it sounds strange, but it's at a building called the Thurgood Marshall College Administration Building. It's just my story, where I was handcuffed at a place that was titled Thurgood Marshall College Admin at UCSD. So pretty ironic, but that's kind of how it was. And when I went back to that psychologist and I asked him where my stuff was, just looks at me and says, "You're misremembering. You didn't leave it here," and winked at me. I was like, okay, cool, done with you. And from there, we talked it out. And even the reason he had me handcuffed and or had that whole process happen had nothing to do with the three main reasons that you were qualified to, you know, harming yourself, harming other people. There's a few other qualifications, but he couldn't even put me in that. He made up a reason when he told me the reason he did all of that. So it's like, yes, police officers, major issues when it comes to mental health. I definitely did all of the things that people have said in the context of that. And even in protests, you know, police officers being there, you know, that I've been at, and, you know, major protests at UCSD, and there's been, you know, police interactions, just so many to name. And even the recent one I had where, you know, I was driving on the left-hand side, going to a location that's 10 to 15 minutes away. So you're not, you know, to be trailed for that long is a long time. And the police officer is on the right-hand side of the lane, or I'm on the left, and I kind of go over on this side because I have to, you know, make it to the ramp. And all these cars kind of end up, you know, going on the left-hand side. And that's when, lo and behold, the police officers are right, you know, following me. And so I'm going up on the ramp, and I go and I keep going. I'm like, wow, they're still trailing me. And I get off the exit, and I'm like, okay, because in those moments you're thinking of every right thing you can do, because you've had those conversations before about you got to do everything, to a T, especially when you're driving, and so you're trying to do every possible thing that you can. And so in this case, I'm like, okay, Tasha, make sure you fully stop, and like, at the stop sign, and turn your signal on 500 feet of, whatever, in terms of California driving laws and stuff. And so I did all that stuff, and I think it was like the light was red, so I'm like, dang it, I have to wait here while these fools are behind me. So then I think I'm like, okay, God, I say a little prayer, because I'm like, okay, God, you gotta help me with this. Like, I don't know what to do. And then I think the light, because I think there's a left turning signal from this end, and they start turning, and then when that light starts going yellow, I hear like this voice of like, oh, you need to go right when that turns red and that turns green. And so that light turns red and that light turns green. Mind you, on the left lane, there's so much traffic of cars. And so that's when I right when that light turns green on these guys' end, I turn right. And then those cars basically, so that basically the police officers aren't able to follow me because the cars come behind me. And I'm like, thank God, because who knows what that would have looked like if they had been able to follow me. So I've definitely seen like heavy trauma and heavy resentment and heavy just like emotional burdens when it comes to foster care and police officers. Too many stories to count that I care to name right now, but like I've also seen like in these really small moments like just like really wild things happening where it's like, okay, that could have been something else. Like I could have been Alfred Alongo in San Diego, who passed away because he had a mental health crisis and was killed. But like grace kind of saved me in that moment. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tasha. Very powerful story to share. I appreciate you for being open. And just, it's just very powerful story. And I'm just so grateful to have you here with us today. And just, I'm very excited to hear more about you, and for you to be able to share your story with the world, in hopes that you can help someone else feel encouraged to share theirs. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to listen to you. We appreciate it. Next, we'll have Irie speak.
Hi, y'all. So my most recent direct experience with the police was I was new to Dallas, and I was going a little bit over the speed limit. I'm a safe driver, but I went a little bit over the speed limit because I was coming down a hill. It was a whole thing. He pulled me over, and in my mind, I'm like, I could die from this simple everyday life experience. Like this, I'm in Texas. This is where Sandra Bland happened. I'm very much aware, I'm a Northerner, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm very much aware of the differences in the different parts of our country and how just being Black in different parts of the country has different experiences attached to it. Not that oppression doesn't exist everywhere, but it expresses a little bit differently. And so I had an anxiety attack for about an hour afterwards. That I like pulled over. I'm not someone who cries easily. I was in tears, shaking, afraid for my life, thinking of all the people who have, been pulled over for similar things or sometimes nothing at all, and who have ended up dead because of their interactions with the police. And so and long story short, I don't trust the police. I don't feel safe by them. They've never been something that's made me feel safe. Additionally, every time you go to a different home or you're pulled out of your family home, you are escorted by police. And so as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, the psychology of sitting in the back of police cars, the psychology of sitting in, police stations at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out what's going on, being tired, being sleepy, being hungry, and being afraid to even ask to go to the restroom because you don't know where you are and you don't know who these people are. And and there are criminals literally around you. It's scary. And that's definitely not how any kids, especially foster youth, should be treated. But I wanted to take a moment to touch upon a little bit like second generational trauma of police. So like some of the other panelists spoke about, my mother, she struggled with extreme mental illness most of her life. She has bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And when she was, I believe, in her late teens, early 20s, the police responded to, I guess, a call about her acting, in a rage or something. And they beat her so bad that she's missing her 2 front teeth, and so I grew up knowing my mother without her 2 front teeth, because the police beat them out of her mouth. And in my opinion, that's just not how any mentally ill person should ever be treated. They shouldn't be met with such violent force and struggle when they need help. They need mental and emotional help. They need psychiatric care. They need understanding, you know? And so just having another thing that I could bring up, my cousin, who I lived with at one point in time, she went to a school where the KKK burned a cross at the school while the children were there. No police involvement at all. And so it's like, you know, you all can show up in situations when Karen and Becky call, but you know, when little, you know, student A is trying to learn English and she looks out her window and sees a burning cross, you're nowhere to be found. And so like the impact, the lasting impact of generational trauma, decades and decades and decades of police brutality, you know, being literally a part of our epigenetics at this point, I'm convinced. It's deep. And so, yeah, that's all I'll share for now, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivory. Very powerful story, very powerful. And Lord, you guys, you guys have just shared so a small fraction of your, you know, disappointment with the police and how they have failed you during your experience while in foster care. And just as a former foster youth, I can totally relate. And so it just makes it makes it hard for us to be able to communicate these type of things because people are looking at us as the problem, as the aggressor, as the, you know, the person who is here because we did something bad, you know? And, you know, coming from families often who do not protect us, you know, when you have people who are hired and in line to protect you and they fail to do so, then you often feel like you have no one to depend on or to rely on for emotional support or just physical support. Even some of the stories that you guys shared, you know, it sounds like that you needed to be, you know, removed and loved on, you know, from that process, and it didn't happen and it failed you guys. And I'm sorry for that. I recently wrote an op-ed dedicated to my experience about police brutality and how I felt I have dealt with racism while being in foster care, and just some of my earliest memories with dealing with police, you know, just in my childhood. And then as I became an educated woman, 2 master's degrees, and I'm still, you know, traumatized and afraid to get pulled over, and, you know, and I'm in fear of it. And so it just breaks my heart that there's so many of us who have come from different places and different spaces, and, you know, we have had to go through those things alone. I will post the op-ed that I wrote in the chat room for anyone who would like to read it. And I just wanted to thank you ladies for sharing your powerful experiences and being open to really speak about those. And so at this time, we would like to give other current and former foster youth the opportunity to share their experiences. I would ask a question to each of our panelists, and then if you have lived in care or have at any time in your life and you would like to share your experience, you are free to share and answer the question as well. Please use the raise hand feature, and so that you will be allowed to speak. And so, yes, I would like to segue into our open discussion and just open the floor for anyone who would like to speak. I encourage you that this is an open space. And we're all here to rely on each other and support and bring awareness. And so just thank you guys again for being here with us today. So there has been a lot of talk about protesting in ways people view it and rather people agree with the movements. Ivory, what is your opinion on protesting, including the rioting? And do you believe these actions are ways to bring about more racial equality?
Yeah, so thank you for this question. I feel like protesting, including rioting, is one of many ways to bring about racial equity. You know, we all have our own strengths and our weaknesses. We all have our different talents and skill sets. Just like Blackness is not a monolith, neither is the journey of achieving, you know, equity. And so Before I forget, I want to preface this conversation with the argument about rioting being violent and uncivilized. That is absolutely insane. Racism in itself is violent and uncivilized. The people who perpetuate it and protect it and institutionalize it are uncivilized and violent. And there is no way around that. You can't make that a beautiful, civilized, nonviolent thing, right? And so we have to let that whole thing go. And sometimes that looks like effing some stuff up to get people's attention. Forgive my French. But so I don't support respectability politics. I don't think that it's not the way that I choose to live my life again, but I'm just one person among many. So those of you who choose to believe it and support it and institute it, good for you. We all have our path towards equity. But this is where respectability politics, it just grinds my gears, right? Because how are we to reach a people who dismantle a pathology that has been protected through blood and bone? Like, people have died generation over generation over generation. And we're not even talking about back in the slavery times, we're talking about 2020. You know, this is real life in 2020. I don't have to go back to my ancestors from 100, 200, 300 years ago. I can go back to my cousin down the street. You know, and so let me refocus. So again, racism is a pathology that thrives on violence. It's a pathology that thrives on uncivilized actions. And so sometimes to get to systemic and systematic oppression, we need to use the same tactics through which they're employed. I say all that to say that protest can manifest itself in varying ways. So if you are an educator, your protest can look like teaching Black and brown kids the truth so that they can be empowered to live their best lives. You are a healthcare worker, it could look like taking care of and listening to the pain of Black and brown bodies and repairing them so that they can go back to the front lines and do that work that they're doing. If you are a social worker, that looks like giving the resources to people who need them so that they can have their best lives and move towards some form of equity, right? At the end of the day, there's more to get to racial equity. There's more than one way to dismantle all of these oppressive systems through which we exist in America and throughout the world. All you have to do is choose one. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes, drop the mic and walk on off, Ivory. I love it. Thank you. Very powerful in your words, and in your demeanor. I really appreciate you for being open to share your story and to open up the discussion. So we would like to open up the floor for any current or former foster youth who would like to join in and answer the question, including any of our panelists as well. This is the time for open dialogue. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand so that you could be able to answer the question and share your own personal experience.
So we have one person that has raised their hand. I'm gonna allow Evelyn Rodriguez to speak. So just so that you know, you're gonna be able to speak in a couple seconds here. So
thank you.
Evelyn, you're now on the mic.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So my name's Evelyn Rodriguez. I was in foster care starting at 14 years of age until I aged out. But before that, DCFS was always involved in my family, and I was pulled out of my home a lot of times. My first experience with an officer, with a cop, was at 5 years old. And I had ran away from home because I was being abused at home. And I was brought back, but it wasn't my only time. Because I'm also disabled or labeled disabled and labeled special needs at those times. There was a lot of instances where in school, the cops were called on me. And so because of that, for my own safety, quote unquote, I was put in juvenile hall, East Lake Juvenile Hall, for one time for 6 months and another time for 2 weeks. I'm gonna be honest and say that I didn't, although I read and I knew about what we were going to talk about today, I didn't prepare myself for what I was going to be listening to, right? And and listening to everybody speak brought up everything that y'all said, brought up an instance in my head of PTSD, of an experience with the cop and or with police. And one of the most poignant that right now that I have is that 17 years old, I had a partner that beat me almost to death. I was pregnant at the time, and they beat me so bad that I had lost the baby. And I was able to escape their house the next day in the morning with their family's help. I was able to escape. And when I called the police, because I wouldn't call the police, but I didn't have nowhere to go. I had nowhere to run. I didn't know where my family lived. I was barefooted on Atlantic and Telegraph. I looked like I needed support and help. And I called the police, and I only wanted them to take me somewhere else. And the cop who picked me up decided that it was a good idea to take me to one of the streets where their department is off of, and they tried to sexually abuse me. And I already knew that these things happened, and it was so normalized to me at the moment. And so everything y'all are saying, like, I feel like, thank you for having these conversations, because although sometimes at least today, thank goodness, I feel okay. And saying that is so much, it's so big, and it's so important, that listening to what y'all are saying, it really reminds me that I'm in the path that I need to be in. And I really agree with a lot of the stuff that, especially what you were saying, Ivory, F respectability politics, if I'm correct, that was Ivory, or Tasha, I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, I learned a lot about what we can do for each other, right? And how we can talk about these things, about defunding police, abolishing the police, but not only just talking about them, really seeing how they look like. And to me, this is what they look like, right? It's to build community, to talk about the things that need to be addressed, and also being the ones to address it. Because although we ourselves carry a lot, I think that there's a lot of power and knowledge in that, right? And not everybody is going to go about things the ways we do, because we know them differently. And so that's, I know it sounds like I didn't expect to speak, but that's just a little bit of how much I really do appreciate moments like this and what we're doing and what we put our power into. So I just want to appreciate you all for sharing, and I wanted to just share a piece.
Evelyn, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming into the conversation and joining us, and just being open-minded, and just feeling, encouraged to share. And so thank you. You had a very powerful story, and I'm just at awe with you guys and the amazing things that you guys have been through. So thank you so much. I believe that you will give somebody else and encourage them to speak as well, as someone who is not on the panel. And so I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you all.
All right, so I'm gonna be muting Evelyn. Oh, Ivory, you wanted to jump in?
I forgot
to leave Evelyn up.
I forgot to add this, but please take care of yourself. That is one of the most radical forms of resistance and moves towards equity, because if we are out here broken physically, mentally, emotionally, in whatever kind of way, we're not going to be our best selves, and that's just not what we're doing with this movement. So take care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit. You don't have to be out on the streets protesting every single day. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to turn off your social media. Do what you need to do to be healthy first and foremost. That in itself is enough. Anything else is extra.
Yes, thank you, Ivory.
I'm gonna just, Evelyn, thank you for speaking. I'm just gonna lower your hand. We have a couple other people waiting to jump on, so. Okay, Rona, I'm going to be allowing you to talk here in a couple of seconds. All right, we should be able to hear you now.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you for allowing us to hear these young ladies speak. You guys are amazing. I really don't have words to describe. Your stories are amazing, and your willingness to be vulnerable is greatly appreciated. I am a social worker out here in New York City, and I am a former foster youth. I wasn't in care as long as some of the young ladies on the panel. I wound up staying in care for about 2 years, and honestly, my interactions with the police at that time were minimal, and it was so long ago. I'm an old lady. It was so long ago that I can't remember exactly what those interactions look like, but I've been in child welfare for over 15 years, and in that time I've observed police interactions or staff interactions with police when it comes to youth, and some have been good and some have not been so great, right? And so it's really caused me to really, with everything that's happening now, really think about how do we in this system work with police entities so that our youth are not being targeted, right? It makes me think of some group homes that I've monitored that did really great work with. The first response wasn't to call the police because one of the young people was maybe having a mental breakdown or having a moment, right? Not even a mental breakdown, just having a moment. Everybody's a human being, and just really trying to connect and engage and stay connected with young people. And so I think this is definitely an important conversation. I hope this is not the only webinar you all will have. I think it's something that needs to continue to happen. I think if you haven't reached out to New York City's ACS Children's Services, that's definitely something that you maybe want to put on your radar to reach out to them, because they're always interested in hearing young people's voices. And I think this is a conversation that needs to continue to happen. And I just want to second what Ivory said, that, it's important how we advocate for our young people in care. It's important how we empower them to use their voice the way they feel comfortable using their voice, and that they tap into their power so that they're not feeling disenfranchised, right? And that they do feel that there is hope, and that they do feel that there is an opportunity for them to lead the charge for the change that they want to see. So I really just want to thank you all again for being willing to be on this panel, being willing to share your stories. They're not pretty stories, but they're stories, and they're real, and they're important that those of us that are in this profession hear them, to remind us, to keep us grounded, to remind us why we do what we do, and to remind us that, we always have to be on point, and we always have to make sure that we are asking ourselves when we're getting in our feelings, why are you doing this work, and who are you doing this work for? So thank you.
All right, I'm gonna let, thank you for sharing with us as well. I'm going to let Atanya now speak. Sorry if I'm butchering anyone's names, but I'm lowering your hand now, Rona. So Atanya, we should be able to hear you. No? Okay, sorry, we're having trouble with hearing you. So I'm just gonna go to the next person, and if you're able to share your sound, let us know. Manpreet is the next person. We should be able to hear you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey there. So firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for creating this absolutely critical and necessary space, and for allowing us to come together as a community. I also have experiences with police brutality and misconduct while I was in the foster care system. I remember I was at my bio mom's home during a visit, and her and I were having a disagreement. It wasn't like physical or overly intense or anything like that, but the police arrived. And as I was walking out of the house, mind you, I was maybe like 115 pounds at that point. I was walking out of the house, and the police came from behind me and tackled me onto the floor. And this was like a 6 foot something man. And so if me as a Asian Indian person who falls under the model minority stereotype was subject to that, I can only imagine what folks who don't have that privilege are subject to. I think it's so important. Like, my guess as a foster care professional and a foster care advocate, from just anecdotes and the types of calls that I receive from youth in crises, is that Black folks and Latinx folks in foster care are subject to this at a much higher rate. And I really want to look at what those numbers are. And I think on some level, all, or if not most, foster youth understand that this is a problem. And I think it's important that we start looking at the numbers. I think it's important that just as we're seeing communities now divest from their police, I want to see a foster care system where we've divested from the police, and frankly, where we've divested from social work that moves with like a type of white savior complex. You know what I mean? So again, I'm just really grateful that we're having these conversations. I'm hoping that this is going to become common knowledge, not only for current and former foster youth, but for the larger public, so that we can move to address this head on.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to allow Atanya to try and speak one more time, and then if not, we'll move on to the next question. All right, so we're giving it one more shot. Can we hear you? Okay, can't hear you. So we're gonna just move on to the next question here. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank you for you all for sharing. And just, I'm so grateful. I wanted to bring this question, ask this question to Tatiana. I know that you had briefly shared with us some of the experience that you have had dealing with the police. Just for those who are on the call, who advocate for foster youth and necessarily haven't stepped outside of their own personal perspective, to just, offer a little bit more sensitivity and support. Could you share how dealing with these issues have affected you?
Definitely. So I am going to reference these notes a little bit just so I can stay on track. One thing I forgot to say is when we were explaining our police experience and how we've interacted with them, I didn't mention that after my traumatic experience, I was called in as a runaway and the police came and they asked me if I had any weapons or paraphernalia on me. And it was 2 male officers who then proceeded to grope me. And I have been told in the state of Minnesota that male officers cannot search you or touch your private parts at all, but they did it anyways, which then re-triggered my PTSD, sent me into a full-blown anxiety attack, which they then laughed at me about and said, please don't make our job, not please, but don't make our job harder than it has to be. And it was just a very hard thing to experience, the emotions that came up during that time. So that's kind of what I wanted to focus on. I felt like I could not trust the police. I still feel like I can't trust the police. I definitely have my guard up whenever there's police around me or just encounters with them, because I am terrified, even as a white female, which is, I'm obviously not even close to the issues that people of color have and other individuals, but just that fear of police at all. re-triggering of my mental health from those issues that had occurred when I was talked to school. When I had been sexually assaulted, they were trying to almost force me to press charges on the offenders, and it just took all power away from me. I felt like my situation wasn't my situation anymore, and that just forced to deal with things that I hadn't even accepted myself yet, and just thrown into that totally. So it just, I feel like, exacerbated a lot of my PTSD, my anxiety, and just made it very difficult to move forward from that scenario. Just the emotional responses engraved in my psyche about who I was as a person, my identity was. I felt like because of my behaviors, because of my mental illness, I deserved to be treated that way from law enforcement. And that these people of authority, if they are treating me this way, you know, people that we're supposed to respect and people who are supposed to treat us well, that maybe I just don't deserve fair treatment for whatever reason. So just very emotional things from the police. And yeah, that's something that carries with me to this day. You know, those situations happened 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and that's still something that hangs over my head and is a core memory from my childhood. And yeah, that's about it. That's what I have to say there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tatiana, for sharing that. And we'll just seg right into the next question for Tasha and anyone who would like to chime in. What are your thoughts on the death of George Floyd and many other unarmed victims who have been killed by the police?
This question is like a heavy hitting one for sure. I think out of all the questions, I was like, whoa, this is the one where I was, you know, like, I'm talking like in my lifetime being in college and stuff, like going after this stuff. I guess I must have been in 12th grade, I guess, when Trayvon Martin and that whole era of things started, in terms of like the next era of protesting and resistance and pushing this stuff forward. And my involvement in college looked like, you know, freeway frontline protesting. It looked a lot of like joining forces with those who led the way towards those kinds of things. But the hard part was like every time you heard it, like you heard it, you just every time you heard it, Michigan, every time you heard it, Missouri, every time you heard it, Oakland, every time you heard it, Brooklyn, it just hits you that much harder, and it hits you that much heavier. And I will reference this, I was going to say it and I will re-reference it again. Even in the light of George Floyd, the memory that I referenced of a name who I'm hoping you guys know, but if you don't, you know, say his name, because this is someone who, again, a lot happens in the East Coast that we know. It's overt stuff that happens, and people, it's kind of common knowledge that in the East Coast that it's overt. And I think you'd be surprised how overt racism is heavy in California, but it hides under the lens of covert stuff. And so I reference his name, so I'll say his name. Alfred Alongo. And I remember it was a Tuesday that I heard of his death, and very similar to my story, where fight or flight, mental health stuff going on. I think he had a background coming from, it might have been East Africa, I'm not sure exactly what space, but definitely an amazing guy from what I could hear, and what his abilities and talents were. But in a moment, he just like had this heaviness, and like the police officers in San Diego, sorry, I didn't mention that part, but that's important, in San Diego shot him dead. And I remember going to an event and feeling so heavy, like, and feeling like it was a church event, and feeling like I couldn't share this event because I felt like people would treat me like a charity project and say, get over it, like, don't worry about that stuff. Like, and in this season in my life of like doing the frontline protesting, that's kind of where my head was, of like, really, like, of all people, like, you know, it's just kind of like how despondent and how like careless and apathetic can people be in this, and just kind of made sense, because like a lot of those folks maybe definitely weren't gonna relate to someone who foster care, African or African American or Black, you know, and has these experiences. And just thinking to myself, like, that literally could be me.
or that literally could have been me. Like that could be me in any moment in my trial of figuring that out. And so I think in those seasons, that's what my life looked like. And then further down, you know, Brianna, George, you know, Ahmed, and many others who have passed. And there's more names, you know, you're talking about Chicago. What's going on in Chicago? Like so many things happening. And it's just like, again, like resurfacing stuff like of like heavy feelings. But this time around, and I know it sounds crazy, but like this time around, there's some pretty impossible things that seem to be happening where I'm starting to notice like a resounding hope coming up. This time around, my protest looks different. I'm doing it through advocacy versus in the streets. I have a lot of lethargy going on, so I just like Ivory said, I believe it was Ivory who said it, like taking care of yourself is so fundamental. And I mentioned resistance and protesting. Existence is resistance. And so my very existence is dang near an impossible anomaly. And when I see someone who's a police officer whose knee is on a man's neck saying, you know, like, and he's calling out his mama, like such an intimate cry of like, I can't breathe. And like that type of, that's like the epitome, the ultimate representation of a power struggle, both personal and interpersonal, as well as systematic and institutional. And so, you know, that's kind of where my heart is towards that advocacy. But I can't even describe 3 years ago, my emotions were suppressed by meds. And now that I've healed from the labels of that stuff, like again, an impossible anomaly of healing from a diagnosis that you can't heal from. But I healed from it. I got off the meds. The label's gone. I don't see my worth in the crap that they put on me. I'm not taking those meds anymore. And I'm more myself than I've ever been before. But looking at that, now that I can feel my emotions, I feel way more, you know, crying all night, like those weeks, and still like heavy, you know. And so it's just like, that's been my heart for it. And I feel it more than ever. And I love that there's different variations and ways to advocate and to protest and to resist as we exist. And those who are people of color, who are Black and brown, existence is resistance. And a lot of my self-care has looked like finding ways in my shallow, short breath to be able to breathe, because like so many others were, again, like their lives were taken, and it's continual and it's not stopping. And it's not stopping until this thing is figured out in the way that we can. And respectability politics, I love that conversation of like, no, like the insurrection of the masses of the people and these things is at the very heart of it. All right, 400 years, like in 2020, still to this day, y'all ain't listening. Like, this is the internal struggle. You want to talk about fires and buildings on fire? That's the fire inside of them. Like, and no one saw that or heard it. So now you're just seeing it, you know, on display. Like, this is just exposure to what's really going on in the trauma, generational and current trauma. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if I answered the question the best way I could, but I'm more just saying my thoughts on kind of the current circumstances. But at the same time, there's been a heavy grief, one of 7 layers with the whole COVID stuff. Even an African-American kid in Wisconsin who I know of, and people on this call might know their name, the person's name, who passed away of COVID. Like, I'm thinking of all these layers of grief I'm going through. And again, like at the same time, I'm healing and I'm finding hope, and my existence is resistance, and, you know, continuing to advocate for others and until this thing is like is squashed, you know. So tried to explain that the best way I can. So sorry if the verbiage is wild, but yeah.
No, thank you, Tasha. I think you did an amazing job explaining your perspective and providing some more emotional detail to support, you know, your feelings and your experiences. And so thank you. I know that we talked briefly about that being a tough question to ask and answer from me to you. And so thank you for just being open. And it was perfect. Thank you. And so I wanted to use this time to ask Aaliyah, what are your feelings with these deaths, which are often recorded? And how do you feel when the officers are found not guilty?
Hey, yeah, so everything that everybody has been saying have been like very heavy. Like Tasha was saying, I was also growing up, during the time of Trayvon Martin. And like all we saw at that time was, everybody in support, going to school with the black hoodies with the Arizona tee and the Skittles on it. All we saw was, people saying his name. Like I was in a school where literally in the hallways, people bring posters to school during that time. People wore their sweatshirts. People, advocated. They, booted up at the white teachers. I mean, they was with it. They was really, it was like serious racial tension. When that whole situation happened. And like, so to start off in 2 words is pissed off, just like everybody, pissed off, angry, hurt, upset, resentful, don't want to see a police officer in your near vicinity, even if they are doing the right thing. You just don't want to see them, and so I would start with saying, at the end of the day, I know that like many of you feel it would be best if the tables were turned and the oppressors would be able to feel the pain and the trauma and the epigenetics that's literally impacted Black communities in America forever. But I want you to know that oppression anywhere to any group of people is an injustice, and it wouldn't make the better world or the situation better. The solution to this is equality and equity in all situations where injustice is represented. The feelings that I believe our entire country, especially African American communities, are feeling when you see it on video and when these officers are not arrested or brought to justice is that the system only works one way: for the wealthy or for those in power. Yet that's not the ideology that they ingrained in us growing up in school. They taught us that wrong is wrong and right is right. And when you do something wrong, you'll get in trouble. But then when you grow up, you see that the system only works for some people. And it makes everyone outraged because they feel hopeless and powerless and unsafe with the very people that were meant to protect you, with the people that wear a uniform and a badge. I feel like the outside world only sees the anger and the rioting, but for the African American community, it's a constant reminder of the same injustice and racial inequities that we faced our entire life, that ancestors faced, went from the fields to segregation to every other injustice that, African Americans in this country have faced since then. If they commit a crime, they kill your loved ones, they don't face appropriate consequences. Everyone is making excuses for them. But when it comes to the community, especially for minorities, then there's no excuses to be made. When did society get to the point where they make excuses for murder? That literally is the mentality that makes people feel like Black lives don't matter. That is why no one's using the hashtag All Lives Matter, because when you make excuses for a murder that's literally publicized, not just on social media, but every major news screen in the country, and then there's constantly an excuse for why those people can't face appropriate actions, that's why we use that hashtag and that saying. They often face, when minorities get in trouble, they often face the harshest sentence possible. And so these officers should all be held accountable, because at the end of the day, we can't keep pushing the view that there's not a man behind the badge. We have to make people know that everyone is human and can be held accountable for their actions, and that no one's above punishment, because that's what's leading to an anarchy. There's an anarchy existing within the entire police force. The anarchy isn't coming from the rioters. It's not coming from people tearing down statues. It's not coming from people destroying property. That's just a simple after effect of the things that already were going on. And it makes everyone feel like it's only justice for some, not justice for all. And this is the very breeding ground for the systematic oppression and corruption that this country was built on. That's all I have to say.
Very, very powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Aaliyah, for being able to share that. It was almost like a heartfelt speech. And so I really, really appreciate that. And I'm very grateful that you wanted to share that with us. So thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. At this time, we would like to give everyone on the call, current, former, and foster youth, and any of our attendees, the opportunity to speak. As you will see, our panelists have introduced methods that they believe that can help individuals cope while dealing with traumatic experiences. And so my question that I wanted to pose to everyone on the call is, how can you, current and former foster youth, cope with raw emotions related to experience traumatic events, like experiencing police brutality, like experiencing police in general, and racism, and having to deal with, seeing our loved ones being murdered and injustice? How can we deal and cope with these traumatic experiences and the challenges they are forced to deal with through care and so forth? And anyone on the panelists can share. And if you would like to, if you're in the audience, please use the raise hand feature if you would like to speak, to have an opportunity to answer the question.
I will just talk briefly, especially with my trauma. I think that it's so important that you feel like you have a safe place to even talk about things. And that's so huge, because if you don't feel safe talking about things, that's going to re-trigger your PTSD. That could actually make your PTSD worse, or any experiences that you've had. So that's just really huge. And also talking to people that you trust, and feel like you're non-judgmentally, talking about things. I think that that's so huge, because I think that's so overlooked. People don't really talk about the importance of having a safe space and what happens if you don't have a safe space. So just that, and having a strong support system. I think that it's so easy to, when something happens, we kind of shut down completely. We isolate, we don't talk about things. When we have a support system, when we have people who want to help us, who are reaching out, who want to make sure that we're doing okay, we start to kind of feel that we start to feel better about ourselves, and we start to feel like we can accept who we are even after the things that we've experienced, and that people, still care and accept us even when we've gone through those things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else on the call that would like to answer the question about how we can cope and help current and former foster youth deal with experiencing traumatic events like this?
I would say don't be fearful of therapy. I know there's a lot of stigma with therapy and mental illness, mental and emotional health and well-being. We need to eradicate that. We need to normalize therapy. We need to normalize healthy mental and emotional well-being. And there are also a lot of opportunities happening online with online therapy because of COVID-19. And additionally, there are organizations who are paying. They're willing to pay for people to have access if they can't access it for whatever reason. And that doesn't account for Medicaid and Medicare. So I think that therapy is a really beautiful, powerful thing. And for those who have engaged in it, also don't be afraid to switch your therapist. Feel that he or she can't culturally connect to you or treat you in a way that makes sense to how your cultural background has influenced your needs. So just therapy. It's a beautiful, healthy thing, and nothing is wrong with it. And we need to normalize mental and emotional health.
Yeah, I just real fast wanted to ditto that, yeah, switch from whoever the heck that was, a UCSD therapist, and until the best therapist I've ever had, a lovely Black woman who lives in an area where there's a lot of protests happening. And it almost feels like now we're just like just having tea and just talking, just me and her, just almost like, it almost feels mutual, but at the same time therapeutic for both of us. It's the craziest thing, but I love the therapist I have now, because we, obviously I identify with her in those ways, and it was intentional seeking her out with my work in EAP and stuff. So definitely ditto that. Someone who can culturally connect, and even doing an informational interview for 1 minute before you see them, looking them up online and knowing who it is you're going to see before, and then calling them and doing a 1 minute informational interview about the things you'll need, and seeing what they think about it before you even step into the ring with them, and you already know a little bit like as enough as you can to kind of get an idea of like, okay, yeah, I can go with this. So definitely ditto that. And I'll add to, in terms of my life, like I mentioned or hinted at, this weird impossibility of having a diagnosis or medically that doesn't really make sense for you to get off meds, that a diagnosis that you're, it's a life sentence. So I'm going to throw this out there for those that catch it. If not, whatever. For me, one of the biggest healing things that I've experienced is my spiritual background. And like I said, the grace of God being huge in that. And so I feel like the last 6 months have been the most healing and rewarding moments than ever before. So yeah, to where that diagnosis was probably a false diagnosis, but more of it was heavy trauma that I never dealt with for like 19 years. I think I suppressed all of those emotions because I wasn't allowed to cry in those homes. But so much healing happened, not only in the years of my college years being the worst years and the best years of my life, but also a second round of that. And I just want to encourage even the concepts that folks were talking about with our ancestors and just in the times past, like you got to realize in 400 years since 1619, I guess 401, right? It's 2020. Like there's so much resiliency and so much strength and so much, like muscle built up in the diaspora, in the African diaspora. I'm targeting that because that's my background and who I am. But that like there's never been such a resiliency and a spirit of overcoming than like much like any other group, like the folks, Black and African diasporic people. And so over the years, like that just shows like it's vibrant, it's real. And so I love the idea of like being your fullest, most authentic self. I love like going through this healing process and being like, oh my gosh, what is this? Like, I'm not the same person I was with the labels and receiving the labels. I'm not receiving this idea of I'm not worthy or I'm not enough or whatever. I am received by a God who loves me, and I've healed in a way that I've like, again, impossible anomalies that like, okay, this is a real thing, and I see it all the time anyway. So be encouraged. There's so much hope. So while you're coping, coping and finding ways to cope, like be encouraged that there's hope. And in the context of Black Lives Matter, and while we're trying to convince those fools out there who are not getting it, right? Also keep in mind with your own self-worth, take care of yourself, but know that Black Lives Thriving, Black Girl Magic, don't forget them hashtags about Black Girl Magic, right? Don't forget the resiliency. Don't forget we shall overcome. Don't forget where we came from. Don't forget who you are in the context of the oppression, as well as the resiliency and the overcoming strength that you have, for God to really carry you through. And so don't forget both of these beautiful, seemingly dichotomies, but something that we carry within us as a strength. And in the ashes we rise. That's always been our story, and that's never going to change. And so, yeah, take care of yourself, because again, your existence is resistance, and you most certainly matter. And there's people on this call who are in solidarity, as well as understand that you matter, you're loved, you're cared for, you're not alone. Like huge, you're not alone. You're not alone. And like, there's so much hope. And so carry both of those things with you. They're not complete opposites. They're all of who you are, to go forth and do the cool stuff that you got to do. And, when people acting petty and trying to be a little stupid, and all you got to do is sip some tea and, do your thing and be yourself. So, just be who you are, because you know who you are and where you're going, and be encouraged and find people and communities that will make sure that you know who you are. And so, yeah, be encouraged.
Thank you, Tasha, for sharing.
Hey everybody again. I'm with the question, with the way I'm going to answer it, it is going to seem a little bit like kind of rhetorical in a way, but I don't think there is any for sure proven effective way to cope with these experiences, because they're still ongoing. That's like telling someone to like heal or cope with continuously like getting cut over and over again. Like somebody walks up to you and then they cut you and they tell you, okay, now heal from it. Okay, now cope with it. Or ripping someone's heart out, or like continuously disrespecting them, and then like saying, okay, well now how do we cope with this as a community? Like I understand that everyone has to have ways of self-care. Find what works for you. You know, if mind body medicine doesn't work for you, you know, if going to church doesn't work for you, don't force it on yourself, but find your own way. You know, for me, church does work for me. You know, screaming it out, shouting it out, singing it out, that's what works for me, but it might not be the way for everyone else. And I think as a community, and even in society, we just have this way of like pressing these certain ways onto people, like, oh, well, you know, this works for me. The other thing is that this content and these, you know, videos we're seeing of the racial inequity and even people dying is what we see and hear every day on social media. Every time we wake up and turn on the news, look on Facebook, on our jobs, talk to our family, and the majority of the conversations with our friends and our loved ones, it's detrimental on the health of African Americans, minorities everywhere, or anyone who have ever experienced police brutality or injustice. It's like a constant reminder of everything that they've already dealt with. But if I could give 2 suggestions on how to utilize your grief and your pain positively to uplift others during this time, cope with these horrid injustices by fueling your time and anger into organizing community events. Find a way to go into African American communities, educate them, uplift them, you know, work with the young children, you know, work with people that really don't have access to all the resources, assist other people in reaching justice, advocate constantly for change. I organized a protest down here in my state. That was the only way that I could physically think of, because I know I have a bad temper. You know, I'm a social worker, but God ain't done with me yet. So, you know, I know that that was the only way for me to really fuel my anger and, you know, show your fellow brothers and sisters love during this time. Like, love on them, support them, you know, join with them in whatever they're doing in their community. Although we want change so badly, we must know that it will remain the same unless we use our anger to fuel a revolution that will live long after us.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. What a great way to close out our panel discussion. Thank you to everyone who contributed and shared their experiences. And in response to this powerful webinar, FMC is going to offer any former or current foster youth who is pursuing a higher education the opportunity to share these experiences through a written or video project. And so we have included that link in the chat if you would like to share with anyone that you know who has been in former foster care, who is pursuing a higher education degree. They have an opportunity. How I met and was able to meet some of these beautiful panelists is through another opportunity that we have presented. And some of these young ladies wrote about COVID, and we were able to pay them stipends. And so we are essentially going to do the same thing, but this time the topic will be about racism, police brutality, etc. And so that link has been included in the chat. I know that we have about 9 minutes left, and we still haven't got through the question and the questions and answers. So I am going to wrap up really quickly, and then we'll leave the floor open for anyone who has questions. But I don't want to take you guys' valuable time. So again, thank you guys. So also the next slide, you will see we have included some national resources for anyone who would need them. All of these programs cater to foster care youth, so please visit these websites. You will also find a link in the chat room for a poll. And this is just a way for me to assess myself, to assess this webinar, and to hear some of the topics that you guys would like for us to talk about at FMC, and use this platform for in terms of our voices, what type of topics we want to hear current former foster youth talking about. So please take a second to click that link and just fill out the poll for me and answer those questions so that I can be able to evaluate myself in this webinar and potentially bring you guys a better one the next time. And so I ask that everyone, if you have any questions, please introduce yourself, share what organization that you're affiliated with, and then what the question is that you would like for our panelists or anyone on the board to answer.
Raquel, did you want to start with the question that someone submitted ahead of the webinar, maybe? I can post it in the chat here. So
right, I was just going to say, sure, let me go to it really quickly. Okay, so one of the questions that Miss Linda Copeland had sent prior to our conversation today, she wanted to know what roles, or she wanted to ask, what role can voting at all levels of the government play in combating police brutality? And so we wanted to open the floor for anyone who would like to answer that question. What role can voting at all levels of government play into combating police brutality?
I can go if.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that when more people, when more African American people and minorities, people from marginalized communities come out and vote, it shows power and strength. And a lot of times the injustices and corruptions that happen within the police department are fueled by the elected officials, because they may know that something is going wrong and they may just choose not to step up and stop it. But if people of color and minorities don't come out to prevent these same senators and elected officials and, you know, governors, etc., from continuously being elected in office repeatedly, then police reform is somewhat almost hopeless, because it does have to start at the local and state levels. Because even when these federal laws are passed, and I know this as someone who works in child welfare, we constantly see these new federal child welfare initiatives and policies passed, but then once it trickles down to the state and local levels, it's not actually being enforced and implemented, because there's no say-so and no push through by the elected officials, the people that sit in power in those local and state governments, to say, hey, this is what's going on and y'all need to enforce this, or y'all need to make these changes, not just within the police force or the child welfare system or whatever. So by coming out and voting, that's pretty much pushing the people out of office that have those same messed up ideologies and have been in office for years and years and years. And it's allowing a vehicle and a device for change to kind of flow through. So I definitely think that voting is, but I also think that participating, you know, in your local and state governments, making your voice heard, calling your senators, you know, constantly advocating in a legislative way, like that also brings change. Because we can go out there and protest, but at the end of the day, we also have to follow that up with ways to share our voice, like in a legislative way, to get the attention of our senators and to speak out and show that these injustices aren't just happening, you know, in places far away from us. They're happening in our back door, but no one's talking about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aaliyah, for answering that question. Another question that was proposed was, what lessons can be learned from history, including examples from the civil rights movement, that may benefit us, African Americans and minorities, in our fight, in our current fight against police racism and racism in general and police brutality? And so if you guys don't mind, I would have liked to just start off by saying, start off by answering this question. And so from my perspective, I feel like what history has taught us is that we are not going to be able to overcome, and it's almost sad because it hasn't been a long gap between, you know, Jim Crow. It hasn't been a long gap of years between our grandparents and great parents being slaves. And so when I hear people speak about us needing to pull ourselves up from the bootstraps and there's so many opportunities and resources, why don't we want them? It breaks my heart because, and I wrote about this in my op-ed, that there has been many times throughout our history that we have had our own resources. We have built ourselves up by the bootstraps. We have opened our own communities. We've had our own banks. And every time that we have tried to establish some type of generational wealth for ourselves and our families and our children, it was literally burnt down to the ground and physically taken from us by means of violence. And one of the things that I spoke about in my op-ed is that, often white America, shuns us for, being so aggressively, sad about the things that we have went through. And they are the examples that have been given to us about how to be violent, about how to, fight back, about how to do uproars. And so it's crazy to me that, in our history books, we hear about like the Boston Tea Party uprising and how people applaud, people going to get back what was theirs. But then when we go to do it, there's always some type of pushback or negative feedback. And one of the things that I speak about is the protests and people wondering or questioning what protesters are doing. Oh my gosh, they're breaking into stores, they're stealing materialistic things. But why are we not focused on the why? Why are we doing this? Why are we so mad? Like, this is literally a new generation of youth, and we're not taking the same things that had our ancestors and people whom were going through the Jim Crow phase took. We're stepping up, we're speaking out, we're advocating, we're rioting, we're protesting, we're going to those politician doors, and we're protesting outside their homes. We're making it uneasy and uncomfortable for people to be in public during these times. We're making it uneasy for these officers who are not being incarcerated after they kill someone, and it's being recorded. And so there's a lot of power. There's a lot of power in what it is that we can do. And also there's a lot of negative in what it is that we can accomplish. And so I feel like that it's a catch-22. It's literally you choosing between wrong and evil and right and right. And so you have to assess what's in the middle and find a common ground. I do not believe that all protesters are aggressive and violent and, willing to, push the envelope in that aggressive way. I believe that is the perspective from the media. And we have seen over time that the media hasn't been nice to us too, in terms of, the way that they present us and make us look into the public. And so, it's just really, it's a really tough conversation. And I want to open up the floor for anyone who would like to share their opinions and their thoughts on the topic.
What was the question again, Raquel?
The question was, what lessons can be learned through history, including movements like civil rights, that may benefit us when we're dealing with and in our fight against racism and police brutality?
Okay.
Hey guys, we have a couple people in the audience I just want to let jump on here. We have Tanya, who previously tried to speak, so I'm just gonna try and allow them to talk. Hold on. And also, if you guys could try and keep it to 30 seconds to a minute here, because we're just trying to close out pretty soon for folks who have to get going.
Right. So. Thank you so much, Tanya.
No worries. All right, so we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can this time. There we go.
Oh, thank God. Okay, I think what has happened is because when I do Zoom meetings for class, and I normally just have headphones in, and I don't have headphones in this time. So, kind of a little bit like going on the topic that Raquel, was talking about. I'm taking a human relations class. That's one of the 3 degrees that I'm getting. And we talked about how the media is biased. And I try to spread that knowledge with everybody, because the minute that people understand that media is kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of like they pay, third parties to pretty much say what they want to say to make it seem like, oh no, like we're on even sides here. And I feel like that's just one of those things that the minute that we can spread that these media sources are owned by the same 7 people. They're all friends. They all sit at the table together. They all have the common, same sentences that you hear when you switch the channel. So I feel like, you know, getting it out there that people do need to sit down and start learning about history, because I was one of those people who, when I went to school and especially college, it was like, I feel like my whole life was a lie. What is this? Where did this come from? You know, so getting it out there, to being able to educate people, especially on your social media platforms, and especially during this time, to get them to understand, like, you have to do the research on yourself, because nobody is going to do it for you. And the minute people understand that, I think this is where the understanding of where people are coming from, because I see it a lot as to where I would go and educate somebody, and it would get to the point to where they think that I'm just trying to sit here and be mean. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to educate you, because I want you to know the knowledge that I didn't have once upon a time either. You know, when you think about all of this stuff, this is the stuff that we do need to know, especially as a whole race, as the human race all together.
Thank you. I'm gonna let Rona, please let us know how to pronounce your name when you jump on here. All right, so I'm changing who's able to speak. All right, so we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, 30 seconds or less. I just want to second the sentiment that the young lady just had. I think a lot of times we don't know our full history, right? We have a month for Black History Month, but Black History Month is not a month, it's American history. And I think knowing our history and being able, as a collective, and being able to speak to that is really one of the strongest ways to kind of educate people when they say things. So happy to hear what Raquel said about, like, there are so many instances of civil unrest in this country by white people where it's considered civil unrest and not looting and rioting. And so being able to have those concrete examples and know that concrete history and kind of turn that back to people to challenge them in their way of thinking, and really get them to get underneath that second story, right, as to why their immediate reaction is to villainize the victim so that they don't have to take ownership. That was it.
Thank you. I'm glad you were able to speak, and thanks for keeping it short too. Powerful. All right, so Raquel, I think we're good on the people who have raised their hands. So back to you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much to you guys who shared and spoke. And so we have gone over, I believe that this is from my opinion, I thought the conversation was very, very, very good. And I'm just grateful for everyone who decided to attend, who took the time and opportunity to share their experiences and their stories and listen. I want to send out a special thank you to our panelists. You guys were fabulous to work with. It was very, very lovely just hearing you guys' stories, and I hope that we could maintain a relationship, moving forward as we begin to, find ourselves and build through all of these processes and start advocating. One of the goals was to, get a conversation going, to provide an open space for foster youth and for you guys. And so just thank you guys for just having the courage and the strength to be open today, and giving someone else and encourage someone else to speak. And so I just wanted to thank you guys for that. I also wanted to thank Talia, who is the voice behind all our technical support today. Thank you so much, Talia. You have been very, very, very helpful hand, and I appreciate you very much. And so, yes, thank you all who have attended. This was a very needed conversation. Please feel free to submit your poll questions so that I can know what you guys would like to talk about on the next webinar, and how I can make this experience better for you guys. Again, thank you guys for being here, and I can't wait to do this again. If our panelists do not have anything to say, I just would like to say you guys have a great day. Happy Tuesday.